Welcome to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Dame, holistic nutrition coach and speaker. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode here on the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm so excited for yet another amazing guest we have today. Netta Gorman is here joining us. Welcome to the show, Netta.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we were just laughing before recording this that we've been following each other on Instagram for quite some time and kind of supporting each other there. And we finally got together to said, hey, we should come on each other's podcast. So we're making it happen. And I'm so glad that you're here. Yay. So for those who don't know, I'll introduce you briefly, Netta, and then we're going to get into an amazing conversation. So for those who aren't familiar with Netta, she is a amazing woman who knows exactly what it's like to feel out of control with food and cravings. As she approached her mid-40s, she began struggling even deeper with things like constipation, joint pain, relentless fatigue, headaches, and even uncomfortable bloating. Until one day, she decided enough was enough, and through a recommendation from her brother, actually went to see a nutritional therapist, where she was instructed to actually go 2 weeks without sugar, flour, or sweeteners. And of course, as many of you can relate, after struggling with a lot of resistance about having to give up her favorite foods and chocolate, she decided that she could do anything for 2 weeks. And she was finally ready to get out of her own way in order to end her suffering with food. And this is just the start for Netta's journey. She now mentors and guides midlife women through the same transformation that she experienced all those years ago with food. So a little teaser as to what we're going to get into today. So thank you again for being here, Netta. We're so excited to hear your story and to inspire those who are listening. So I love it. I think a beautiful segue from what I just read and shared is perhaps inviting you to share a little bit more about your journey, and what was your relationship with food or your challenges with food, maybe starting back in childhood, wherever you want to start, what does that journey really look like and unfolded for you?
Yeah. Well, from childhood, I grew up in the UK, as you can probably hear from my accent, and I grew up in the 70s and 80s. We ate what I considered to be normally. My mum worked full time. My parents are divorced, so she didn't have a lot of time to cook, but she didn't really enjoy cooking either, but she made an effort to, have a proper meal on the table in the evening. And it's not like she used a lot of boxed foods or, pre-packaged stuff. She didn't always cook from scratch, but she really did her best. And I grew up always having dessert after a meal and sweet snacks. And I had school dinners at school. That's what we call them in England. So I just thought I ate normally. I was doing everything that any other kid was doing. And it didn't even cross my mind that I had any kind of relationship with sugar or with food. It wasn't, I didn't imagine that you could have a relationship with anything that's inanimate and not a person, right? So I just grew up thinking it's normal. And when I became a teenager, I thought it was normal to diet. I thought it was normal to count calories. I thought it was normal to choose the salad instead of the fries, because that was the messages I was getting, really. And I thought it was normal to think about my weight all the time. Plus I was at ballet school, so we all had to be super slim. And so I was very body conscious because I was slim, but I had more curves than a ballerina should have. And so I remember being very conscious of my curves or my bum or whatever it was, and kind of trying to diet my way into a ballerina's body, which didn't work. And I ended up not becoming a dancer. I became a teacher, but all the same, even through my 20s and my 30s, I was always conscious of what I was putting in my mouth and the effect that it had on my weight or my body. But there was no question of cutting out anything, because I didn't think that was normal. So this whole notion of what's normal, now with some hindsight, I can see, no pun intended, but I just swallowed what I was told about what normal eating was. And right from my 30s, I started having digestive problems, skin problems, mood problems, mental health problems, bloating. In my 40s, I had my baby quite late in life. And so by the time I was in my 40s, I was several pounds, like on my small frame, 15 pounds overweight was quite a lot, actually. And I just felt uncomfortable. And I felt like I was doing everything right. I was doing what the doctors told me to do. I was counting my calories. I was including a little bit of everything in my diet because apparently that's supposed to be healthy. And yet I was feeling like crap, really.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned at the beginning, when it was put to me to cut out for a brief period, all the same, but to cut out sugar and flour and sweeteners, basically, and chocolate is part of that. I said, no way, no way. I resisted it for the longest time because I couldn't see how that would help anything. In fact, I thought it would make it worse.
Yeah.
So I resisted. And so I understand what it's like because I had cravings for chocolate and sugar all my life. And I thought if I stop eating those things, my cravings are going to get the best of me, like get even worse. No, I didn't want them to get worse. But actually,
Yeah.
the opposite happened.
Yeah. Yeah. We're going to get into that. I love that. Incredible journey. And I think like one thing that you mentioned that's really, really interesting to pull out there is right how we normalize different eating patterns or different like belief systems. Like we normalize so many, and even like within the microcosms of the cultures that we grew up in, right? So wherever you lived, your neighborhood, your school, like certain things become normal because everyone else is doing them. And I love that reminder for everyone. I often say, right, that normal doesn't mean healthy. When we look in a world around us, a lot of my clients are like, I just want to be normal. And I remind them, no, you don't, because normal means you are sick and dying of one of many metabolical diseases. You probably have cancer. You're overweight. Like that is unfortunately the normal that our world is now. So learning to kind of break away from that, but we don't know any better. Like you said, right? This is just how you grew. It's just how we grew up. Like we don't know to question things until problems start arrives. And
Exactly.
it sounds like that was kind of a catalyst for you. So I know you mentioned a few pieces already around like what was showing up in your body, but can you share a little bit more about what actually led you to finally decide to cut out sugar? Was it
Yeah.
just that recommendation that you got from the nutritional therapist? What was really going on for you at that time?
Yes. So, well, I'd like to just say I didn't decide to do it. I had been backed into a corner by my own body, and I just sort of felt that I had no choice in the matter because I just couldn't carry on suffering. So, I was constipated to the point where I was going to the bathroom once a week, and
Wow.
that is not only uncomfortable; it's actually toxic to the body. And there was nothing. I was eating fiber products, all day long, and it was making everything worse. And it wasn't. I just was desperate. I just didn't know what to do. I was so uncomfortable. Again, it wasn't so much a weight issue, although I had pounds to lose. It was really. Not even, I would say, a health issue. It was a comfort issue. I just was so uncomfortable in my own body. And I would not let go of this idea that I'd already tried everything and that sugar had nothing to do with it, nothing to do
Right.
at all. Or it was actually making me feel better because it was my only comfort.
Right.
And as I say, I felt that I was so desperate. I would just try anything, as crazy as it sounded, to cut my favorite foods for 2 weeks. I thought, well, yeah, I can do anything, I guess, for 2 weeks. And I didn't throw anything out of the cupboards or my kitchen because I knew after 2 weeks I'd go back to them.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So you mentioned a few pieces around this, but I think this is really interesting for many of my listeners. We can all resonate with that resistance that shows up, right? They're like, "No, I don't want to do that." And like you've
Mhm.
mentioned already, I didn't think it was really going to help, or I didn't want to give up my comfort foods. Are there any other pieces there around like what you've reflected on and noticed in terms of like why were you actually resisting giving up sugar for just 2 weeks, right? That feels like nothing, right? But for you, it
Yeah,
felt like a big deal.
it felt like the biggest deal. Because I'd never tried it before, but I didn't have a point of reference to know what life could be like without seeking comfort from those foods, because it felt like, well, if I don't get some kind of relief or comfort or reward from those types of foods, where the heck am I going to get it? Because there is
Right.
no other option. I have no other coping skills. I didn't even know the concept of coping skills. And so it just felt like a big black hole if I didn't have those. Now I consider them crutches, but at the time it was really my best friends, you know? So I didn't want to lose out. I didn't want to have the FOMO, you know, this fear of missing out. I didn't want to feel like my life would be sadder without these types of foods than it already was. So there was no way that I
Yeah.
was going to give them up until I
Yeah.
had no choice.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people can resonate with that. Like, as you shared, right? This resistance being that, like, that fear of losing our best friend or our only sense of comfort, right? You nailed some really big pieces here, right? That we as a society have not learned or been taught how to soothe, how to support ourselves, how to even honor and feel our emotions. I mean, that's a whole thing we talk a lot about here on the podcast.
Yeah.
But these deeper pieces, right? So it makes so much sense that you're like, no, I'm not giving up my best friend, right? Or my source of joy or my source of happiness. I know many of my listeners can relate to that. So what actually changed for you? You say that you were forced to do it. I mean, it sounds like there's this interesting phenomenon that I always notice in health is that until our pain, either physical, emotional, or spiritual, gets bad enough, we don't make changes, right? So it sounds like it got bad enough for you, right?
Yes.
You got uncomfortable enough that you were like, forget it. I'm going to do it. I'm just going to try it. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And I knew, or I thought I knew, that it was temporary. So it made it feel less overwhelming and less intimidating. As it turned out, it went slightly longer than 2 weeks. And it's been 8.5 years. But at the time, you know, just seeing it in small chunks of time made it seem more manageable.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so talk us through for anybody listening to this podcast. I know a lot of my listeners have never gone off sugar before, and they're trying to build up the courage to do that. So I think this is really important that you're sharing your story. What did you notice in your body and mind those first 2 weeks that you gave up
Yeah.
sugar? Like, what exactly did you give up, and what did you start noticing, or what was that journey like for you?
Yes. Well, I got a list from this nutritional therapist of foods that I now call just foods. But at the time, I was like, what's this? Like, it just felt like a very short list. And I mean, I suppose you could call them whole foods. And I just, as I say, I just call them foods these days. But I went to the grocery store with this list, and it felt like I was spending hours and hours in the aisles of the grocery store looking at labels and putting the boxes back on the shelves. Because she had said, look, for those 2 weeks, don't buy products that contain sugar or any synonym of sugar, any types of sugar, flour or grains. You're right. Even so-called whole grains, like bread, for example, which, you know, the grains have still been ground up into flour, and they're not really whole, and sweeteners, right? And that felt to me at the time like pretty much every single thing in the grocery store was off
Right.
limits. And it, even in, like, you know, in condiments and in savory foods, I'd never done this before, look at the list of ingredients, and there I was, you know, and I have like a degree in linguistics and I speak several languages, and I was looking at these labels and could not figure them out.
Yeah,
I
it's
was
a
like,
whole
what
nother
language
language.
is, yeah, what language is this? And so I felt that there's some part of me that started to feel like I was being manipulated by these products, or the industry that made these products, because it felt like they were deliberately making them hard for a consumer, even a well-educated consumer, hard to understand with all this gobbledygook and all these strange words on the labels, you know? Anyway, I ended up but going around the perimeter of the grocery store, which I figured out is where the real foods are.
Mhm.
And so that's what I ended up buying those 2 weeks, real foods. And then I remember the first week, around day 3, I said to my husband, I'm just a bit tired. I'm just going to lie down for a quick nap. And I was out for the count for 2 days.
Wow.
Yeah. And my body had like checked out. I felt like I had flu or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I read up on it later and found out why my body was reacting that way. Not everybody reacts that way, but my body did, from this sort of the change in fuel, as it were, that it was getting, because it wasn't running on glucose anymore, not such a
Mhm.
huge onslaught of glucose from all the sugars and the starches. So the first week was rough, I have to say. I had what I now call detox symptoms. I, excuse me. I was tired beyond anything I'd ever known. Sorry. And I just felt like what I was eating was tasteless. So, sorry, I was just choking. Um, yeah, so I just felt like not normal for the first week. And then after those first 7 days, I got up one morning and I sort of felt like I had this renewed energy, and my movements were more supple, and I had more energy, and my pants felt looser. And I was like, what's going on in my body? Like, I sort of went through this rite of passage the first week, and then the second week, I started to feel so much better. Sorry. And and then after that second week, I weighed myself, which is not something I tend to do. And I'd lost at least 3 or 4 pounds, which for me, because I'm so small to begin with, that's a lot of weight. And I got in touch with the nutritional therapist, and she said, you can start reintroducing a few things. And I said, no. I resisted that as well. I said, no, I'm feeling so much better that I think I'll just carry on for another week and see what happens. And that extra week became another week and another week. And I just kept feeling better and better. And I never wanted to go back.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So you never went back. This was 8 years ago. Like, how long have you been off of sugar?
That eight
Yeah.
and a half years. Yeah, this was July 2015. And I haven't knowingly eaten sugar since. During COVID, when everyone was making sourdough bread, and my husband started making so 2015 up until 2020, that's 5 years. And that is, I think, the first time that I tried bread again. And what I discovered was that I could not stop. Once I started, I couldn't stop. And so I was like slicing slices of sourdough bread, hot from the oven, with slabs of butter, and telling myself, I'm eating it for the butter. It's just a support for my butter. It's sourdough, so it's fermented and it's fine. But the truth was that the way I was eating it, and the way I kept sneaking another slice, was the type of behavior that I used to have with sugar. This kind of sneakiness and trying to kid myself that it's only a small bit. And because I'd had so long without that type of behavior, not just so long without bread, but so long without that type of behavior and, kidding myself, I I was happy without it. And when I saw myself behave that way, I did not want to be that person
Yeah.
with that type of behavior. And, it took a while. The thing was that once I tasted bread again, that sort of rush, that sugar rush from the starch in the flour, it wasn't just start and then stop again. It took me weeks to actually stop sneaking or wanting bread.
Yeah.
And even that, I said to myself, I don't want to spend weeks and all that energy trying to deal with the cravings, the thoughts, the obsessiveness about where am I going to get my next slice of bread. I'd had a break from that for 5 whole years. And so I realized that after a long time, many years of not eating those types of foods that gave me cravings, I wasn't out of the woods, as it were. I couldn't just sort of go back to them and have a different type of relationship with them. It was still an unhealthy relationship with those types of foods, and those types of foods can be different for each person. But I'd lost the taste for sweetness, so sugar itself didn't tempt me. But the bread, so everything starchy, bread, chips, and not all flavors of chips. Salt and vinegar is my thing. Don't ask me why. Those things I still have to really watch myself around those things.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. That's powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I'm curious, you mentioned when we first started talking, right? The resistance that came for giving up sugar was about losing your best friend, losing this comfort.
Yeah,
How did you how did that journey go, right? Obviously you did eventually give up that crutch, right, of sugar.
yeah,
And, how did you then begin to fill those voids, right? That
yeah,
that sense of comfort, that sense of like your friend. How
yeah.
did that unfold?
Well, for a while I didn't. And for a while I had to get comfy. And this is what I teach as well, get comfy with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And, it was a discomfort that when you sort of compare with other people's situations in the rest of the world, in some areas of the world, our discomfort, is what I call a first world discomfort. So if you're, and myself, I was sort of saying to myself, look, if you're struggling with the discomfort of cravings, but basically you have a roof over your head, you have warmth, and we live in Canada, we know how important it is to have a warm house. You have a stable job, you have a stable family. It's a first world problem to struggle with cravings because it means you've got access to all this food and the crave worthy food, which is usually processed food. You've got access to it all. So it's not like my very existence was in danger, but it felt like it. And it's that perception that it's like, well, if I don't have access to this type of food, then my life is, for all intents and purposes, has no meaning. It's over. It's like a very dramatic, it's right, drama queen thing going on. But it felt very real. And when I actually learned how to just sit quietly with the relative discomfort, it certainly wasn't hunger because, I ate several times a day, if twice a day, 3 times a day I was eating. So it certainly wasn't hunger, but it felt like hunger.
Yeah.
And I doubt it was hunger for food. It may have been hunger for actual nutritious food, right? But I learned, it wasn't just, I learned over time to develop the skill of sitting with my relative discomfort and of getting friendly with my needs, my emotions, and looking inside rather than outside for the comfort and the joy. And then once I sort of developed that skill, I liken it to learning a language because I'm a language teacher. You can learn a new language of self-care and and coping skills. Once I got comfortable with that, then I could find other coping skills. So then my human friends became, a support system, right? And then other sources of comfort and joy, like, for example, dancing. I love to dance still, even though I didn't become a dancer. And, making my own podcast, right? It's a source of joy, as you probably know. And helping others get free from sugar, all of those things, teaching, running, walking, all of those things became my sources of joy. And really, sugar fell off my radar.
Yeah. So beautiful. Were there any specific tools that you used in that first phase where you're talking about really starting to learn how to be with your discomfort and feel your feelings? Like, how did you do that? I guess that's the
Yeah.
question. I'm sure everybody's wondering, like, how did you do that? What tools did you use? Did you work with a coach? Did you work with a therapist? Like, what were the pieces there? Or were you just intrinsically motivated and maybe you did some Google searches and
Yeah.
harnessed that for yourself?
Um, I would say I didn't do it very well. No, I didn't have a coach. I didn't even know such a thing existed. And it probably took me way longer than it could have because I didn't have any kind of guidance or, someone experienced to lead me through. I'm a reader, so I read books, but I honestly didn't do it very well or very efficiently, and it took forever. I kept sort of slipping and sliding and not really feeling that I was kind of stepping forward and, making any kind of progress. But when I look back, I did make progress. And yes, I was motivated, but I think some of that motivation was just the fact that I was older when this happened. And so in the second half of my 40s, now I'm almost 54, and I just I was at a stage in my life when I was ready to look after myself. So that also helped a lot. But nobody showed me the way, which is why I'm so passionate about showing others the way now so they don't have to go through that like I did.
Yeah. I can very much relate to that. The up and down, that roller coaster, like trying to figure it out all by yourself, not having any support. I went through that myself for a good 3 years of just like driving myself crazy, trying to figure it all out. And,
Right.
I know we have that in common, is why we're both so passionate about making it easier for women, having that support of our clients. So what would you say have been, I don't know if this is have maybe changed over the years. I mean, you've been doing this and eating this way for so long, but what would you say have been some of your biggest challenges that you've come up against? Like, was it holidays, vacations? Was your husband not supportive? Like, these are a lot of things that I know a lot of my clients come up against. So I'm curious for you, like, what were some of the road bumps that maybe showed up or like really tested you along the way?
Yeah. Well, I have to say I got a lot of support at home. Sort of, my husband and daughter, they thought it was another diet, let's say, at first, and I had to keep telling them it's not a diet. I'm just changing what I eat, but it's not like a weight loss diet. And I did some experimentation sometimes with different types of flour at some point, and my daughter was like, "Mom, can you just make normal food? Stop experimenting. Stop putting avocados in
Right.
everything." And so it's like I had support, but nobody eats like me at home, and nobody wanted to jump in, which is fine with me. We're all responsible for what we put in our mouths, and keep your eye on your own plate. But I'm the one really that makes meals. So, for them, I can add on some extra starches that I don't put on my plate, and that's fine. I still eat potatoes, and I'm not like anti-carbs or anything like that. But our habits changed, and that sort of took a bit of time to sort of be accepted by the family. The challenges I had were more in society or in social situations. So I would have lunch at work, and then people would like judge what I was eating, sort of lean over and pass comment on what was in my lunch, or sometimes I wouldn't even eat lunch, and that would elicit even more judgment, like it's unhealthy. And I'm like, well, I think it's unhealthy to eat when you're not hungry. So I'm going to wait till I'm hungry. And when you cut sugar, your hunger levels, at least mine, went right down. Like I didn't want to snack every 2 hours like a newborn baby. So I don't eat that often during the day. And basically, when I'm not hungry, I don't eat. And that seems to be socially unacceptable. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
some sort of, timeline that's socially acceptable. We have breakfast time, we have lunch time, we have dinner time, we have snack time. And I stepped out of that paradigm, and that shook people up.
Yeah.
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 So, and then I went when I was, because I live in Quebec, the French speaking part of Canada, and I was in the papers about how I eat. And one of the big challenges was other people's comments on social media about how I ate, and they were horrible. Some of them are lovely, and some of them were downright nasty, as if it's anyone's business.
Yeah.
What because all I'm saying is that I feel so much better. I don't see what there is to bitch about, really.
Yeah. People will find a way, Netta.
Mm.
Yeah.
I learned
Uh,
that to my
yeah.
great amazement. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, I relate to a lot of that. And I think all of my listeners, this social piece is massive because we're
Yeah,
so deeply ingrained to really care what people think and to feel accepted and to feel a sense of belonging. And when we
yeah,
start to go rogue and either cut out alcohol or stop eating sugar or, eat only meat, like whatever it is that you're choosing to do, if it's not like accepted as in your society, you're going to get pushback either from your parents or just people at the grocery store, and it is hard. That's a hard part, especially if you notice those wounds are still really raw and like really caring what people think, right? And we're all people pleasers at some aspect. That sense is still in
totally.
me, of course, to like want to fit in. And yeah, that's one of the toughest pieces, right? And why it's so important, in my opinion, to be a part of a tribe and a community, right? Where you can come to and feel that sense of belonging, right? Feel that, no, I'm not alone in this, and I'm supported. So that's beautiful that your family was able to understand and support you, even though they chose not to eat that way. And I think that's really beautiful to pull out for people as well, because I think there are a lot of women out there thinking, well, everyone needs to get on board with me, right? And it can be
Mm,
hard if you're sitting there, eating your nourishing meal and your husband's eating pasta next to you and a bunch of licorice, right? It can be triggering. It can be really difficult, especially in the beginning stages when you don't have, that sense of strength yet within.
exactly.
Um, yeah, so that sounds like it was really supportive for you, and I'm sorry that people are so nasty online. I've been having to deal with that as well, and it really is fascinating when we start to take a step back. I mean, these are just my thoughts on it, right? When we decide to do something radically different, like change our diet, it really triggers other people's belief systems, their fears, and perhaps even culturally. Like I've never been to Quebec, but I would assume, right, there's a big sugary culture there with the poutine and the maple syrup and,
Mhm.
and all the
Yeah,
like
and it
delicious Canadian foods, right? So
yeah, and it wasn't even for those foods. It was just in general. It was just like, why are you rejecting? It felt
yeah.
like it was, why are you rejecting us?
Yes. Yeah. People will feel judged when you decide to do something different for yourself. It brings up the own mirroring effect of their own judgment. And it's fascinating when we can understand that, but it doesn't hurt any less, right? People's words
Right.
still hurt. And I mean, in the world that we live in now with social media, it was a really big challenge sometimes to be vulnerable
Mhm.
or speak your truth. I'm very public on social media, my podcast, and it's hard. I'm going to admit it.
Yeah.
And not everybody, who's listening to this is going to go and put their sugar journey publicly, but I'm just so grateful for people like you, Netta, who are willing to do that and willing to work through, some of those harmful comments and
Right.
stay the course with what you're meant to do and how you're meant to
Yeah.
support women.
Yes. Well, I personally think there's not enough of us feeling good in this world. And one more person who feels good, is like, what's wrong with that? Right. And so I'd like, I enjoy sort of giving hope to people that you can feel good and that it can come from the most unexpected ways, of which cutting sugar. You wouldn't think. It's like the opposite of what you think, right? That you'd think that if you cut all the foods you love, you'd feel awful and have this, lead this dull and boring life. Whereas the opposite is true. And I just want to show that what we think is real can actually be the opposite of what we expect and be even better.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
I like to be like a source of inspiration. In my podcast, the Life After Sugar podcast, also is a source of inspiration because, people can hear all sorts of stories and it's like, oh, so it's not just one way of cutting sugar and it's not just me, there's plenty of us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We need to stick together, right?
Yeah,
We're in this together.
definitely.
Um, okay. One other thing that I wanted to talk about, because I know you've been through a bit of a gut healing journey as well.
Yeah.
And you talk a little bit about this and this kind of conundrum with like sometimes fermented foods, maybe including sugar. I know you and I both make kombucha, for instance, right?
Mm,
And there's
yeah.
conversation about sugar being in there. So yeah, speak to us a little bit about this journey that you went on with healing your gut. Was it just a matter of removing sugar? Were there other things that you did as well to help support those healthy bowel movements that you were not having, and to
Yeah.
sort of get back on track with that? And what role, if any, like did fermented foods play into that?
Yeah. Well, my brother, who was the one that put me in touch with the nutritional therapist, he was already into fermented foods as a business and for personal use. But I always used to think it was completely weird for him to have these huge crops of sauerkraut and fermented carrots on the countertop. And I just thought he was weird because he's my brother, you know. But then I started getting into it as well, again because I was suffering so much from the chronic constipation, and it was like, I'll give it a try, this whole weird thing of foods sitting on the countertop. I thought it was very distasteful and dangerous, but I couldn't I couldn't really deny the fact that my brother was actually much feeling much better, and his digestion was much better since he started eating fermented food. So it was like this, cognitive dissonance of thinking, well, how can this be good for you? It's going to kill me to leave stuff on the countertop. And on the other hand, seeing the proof that, on the contrary, yet another example of things that you think are true actually being something else. So I started off making my own yogurt and making my own kombucha, which, as you know, contains sugar. But, the magic of fermentation is that the good bacteria eat up the sugar, not you. And I don't know how long you leave your kombucha to brew, but mine's like 4 to 6 weeks it brews.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Otherwise,
long
it tastes
time.
that's a long time, right? Because usually it's like 10 to 14 days.
Yeah.
And the longer the fermentation, the less residual sugar there is, because the good bacteria eat up the sugar, and that's what makes the probiotic kombucha. Anyway, I mean, less than that is too sweet for my taste now. And which means that the kombucha is pretty sour, pretty tart at the end of that fermentation process, and the sugar is pretty much all eaten up. So I'm not eating the sugar. I'm just eating the probiotic, the good bacteria, not eating but drinking. Same for my yogurt. Same for my milk kefir, which I make with cream. Same for my sauerkraut, my kimchi. I make them all. And I have a full-time job and a family, which means that I don't have that much time to mess about making stuff like that. So I've found all kinds of shortcuts. The fermentation itself takes time because you can't rush it, right? But the prep time, I've got all kinds of shortcuts that just takes a couple of seconds a day.
Yeah, that's incredible. I love that reminder. I think that's now that we're just kind of side tangenting talking about kombucha. It's like I'm always shocked, right? People just don't know how it's made, and it's this fun drink that you can buy in the store now, right? That's healthy drink that you can buy in the store.
Mm-hmm.
And every time I go, I always catch myself looking, and it's just so fascinating, right? This one can of kombucha can have over 20 grams of sugar in it.
Yeah.
Because it hasn't been fermented long, because whoever's putting it on the shelves knows that the whole society is addicted to sugar. So they want to keep it sweet. They're actively trying to keep these products sweet so that you buy them, right? And more people think they're tasty because your taste buds have been hijacked from sugar. But when you actually make it, like you said, the longer you ferment it, the sugar actually gets eaten and it becomes more almost vinegary or tart. And then you can add your own, flavors to
Yeah.
it and stuff as well. But it's
Yeah,
actually
or not,
delicious.
as the case may be. But I call store-bought kombucha glorified 7 Up,
Ah,
really.
yeah.
Because because
Or
really that it
juice.
comes, yeah, or juice. I mean, it really, and I question how probiotic it is as well by the end of the whole process. So plus it costs a ton. And for me, I think it comes out to about 30 cents a litre, something like that, really. And it requires hardly any effort on your part. And so that's why I teach to make your own rather than which brands are the best.
Yeah, I'm so with you in that. I want to add to that a piece, thinking about a lot of my clients and listeners here really struggling with even like wanting to be in the kitchen or feeling like they're good cooks or hate cooking, right? A lot of these patterns and belief systems have really been handed down to us. And one of the things that I love about fermentation, because I make my own right now, I'm just kind of doing the bare minimum with veggies. So like just cubes of veggies. I'm not getting into sauerkraut. That takes too much time. But just fermented veggies and kombucha, like these things are and even the yogurt, so easy to make. and it kind of makes you feel like a badass in the kitchen. Like if you
Ah,
start actually like experimenting with this, I made my own yogurt, right? Or I made my
yeah,
own fermented veggies. And I used to think that it was going to take hours. I was going to be in the kitchen all day, and it doesn't, right? It's so like I just made a batch of veggies. That's why it's on fresh in my mind. It took me like 5-10 minutes to chop them all up, put them in the jars, put the saltwater brine on top of them. And now they're sitting in my cupboard, just like doing their thing while they ferment.
exactly.
Um, so quick and so easy, and it just feels so empowering to make some things from scratch.
Yeah,
And I think a really important part of tapping back into like our ancestry and how we like naturally were meant to live, where we do preserve our own foods and we do make our own foods and sauces from scratch, right? And obviously trying to find a blend that works for you. I know we all have different desires and different needs and different lives, but yeah, I think it's really fun for me. It's been a part of like reconnecting to being in the kitchen and finding
yeah,
fun in cooking again. And fermentation's
yes,
pretty forgiving. Um,
yeah.
yeah, unless
Oh
your
yeah.
SCOBY goes moldy, which mine just did last week. So I had to throw
Oh.
it out. I've got a girlfriend who does it as well. She's gifting me a new one, so I'll start fresh. But
Yeah, I mean it happens, and really, I read somewhere that real foods, I mean, you don't want them to go moldy, but real foods like fruit and vegetables and whatnot, they go off, at some point. Whereas sort of how processed a food is by how long it will last, what its shelf life is like, and we tend to look for long shelf life. And ironically, fermented foods like fermented veggies, they have a long shelf life because they're naturally preserved through the fermentation process. So it's all good. I mean, I can't see any downsides to
yeah,
them.
yeah. Yeah. So there you go. Hopefully everybody listening is feeling inspired to go do a Google, YouTube search. You'll find instructions. I mean, all these things are pretty simple once you get down to it,
Yeah.
and fun to do,
Yes.
and good for your gut health, which is then
Yeah,
good
and
for your sugar
delish.
cravings.
Exactly. So it's basically the best thing for your gut health is to cut sugar. If
Yeah.
you only do that, you're giving yourself the greatest gift for your gut health. If then you add in the fermented foods and drinks, then it's like 5-star treatment for your gut health. And for me personally, I cannot underestimate the joy of going to the bathroom every day.
So good.
Yeah, it's like, woo. I mean, the first few weeks I felt like running into the street to tell everyone,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Well, especially after struggling so long. I mean, I
Yeah.
hope everybody listening can relate to that. There's nothing quite like a good bowel movement. I am so with you in that. It's like, I need to text all my friends. Like everybody needs to know. Yeah. That sweet relief, right? When you know your body is detoxing and flushing out those toxins that are no longer
Yeah.
needed is just,
And
yeah. So
definitely
critical.
better than all the other high fiber products that I then realized were really highly processed types of fiber, full of sugar, all those bars and
Yeah.
whatnot are full of sugar. The cereals that are high fiber, they're mostly high in sugar
Yeah.
with a little bit of ground up fiber. They were doing nothing. They were just making everything worse for me.
Yeah.
Fermented foods and drinks are what really got my cravings down because my good gut bacteria kind of drowned out the bad ones that cause cravings. And the fermented foods and drinks were like the best thing for my digestion
Yeah.
and my regularity.
Yeah, so
Mm.
powerful. So wonderful. This has been incredible, Netta. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm curious as we wrap things up, is there any final messages or any other pieces that we didn't really touch on that you feel you want to share with the audience before we wrap up?
I think we tend to, or I certainly did, we tend to focus on the food. And I think that's the diet culture that has us looking at what should I eat? What shouldn't I eat? What can I eat? What am I not allowed to eat? And my suggestion or my recommendation to slightly reframe that is to step out of this obsession with the food and get into obsession with yourself. What
Hmm.
do I want? How do I want to feel? What is it that makes me feel good? And for us women, especially mothers, we often feel selfish thinking in that way. But you've heard of this analogy of putting your own oxygen mask on first, right? You cannot take care of others if you're not taking care of yourself. And I help women over 50 get rid of cravings because I found that from about mid 40s and beyond is when we start getting ready, having the time and the brain space to look after ourselves. And so rather than to start off with, what do I eat? What don't I eat? What can I? What
Yeah.
can't I? Is to look inward. How do I want to feel?
Yeah, that's powerful. What a powerful message and wonderful way to end this episode. Thank you so much for being here, Netta. I will, of course, link up all the links to come and connect with Netta below in the show notes. So you can find all those, go and connect and see everything that she's up to. I love everything that you're sharing. Obviously, check out the podcast. I'm going to be a guest soon. I'm so excited to come switch roles and chat with you
Yeah,
on your show. And yeah, I just can't thank you enough for being here today and sharing your powerful journey with us.
you're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And as always, it's been a pleasure having all of you listen in. So grateful for you following along with the show. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Bye, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. If you're loving what we talked about today, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone you love. And if you're ready to dive deeper into discovering your root causes and patterns that are keeping you hooked on sugar, be sure to check out our brand new free workshop series that will help you kick emotional eating for good. Find the link to download this free series and other amazing resources in the